All right, I think this is starting to record now. So thanks for coming. So this session is going to be recorded just in case you can't make it to the in-person session. Thank you so much for the Student Union for inviting me to give this talk about Mitacs funding opportunities. We will have a workshop series throughout the fall semester. So there's other workshops and other topics we'll go over, like finding a professor for research, finding an industry partner, how to write research grants. So if you're interested in that, just look at the SU Science Rep Instagram page, and they'll have a link to register for the workshops. So my name's Annie Huang. So I'm a Mitacs advisor in the Calgary region. So I did both my bachelor degree in chemistry and also my master's in physical chemistry here at the U of C. So I have been here for quite a number of years now. I used to study in this room actually before it was called the Science Collaborative Space. It used to be called the Elbow Room, and it was a computer lab. So I do know where this room was, and I knew it was one of those like hidden secrets. Okay, so hold on. Okay. So just before we begin, so one of the things I've learned when I've as a student, been to conferences and lectures and seminars is a lot of times, people, they talk a lot and, they say things and you're not sure what's happening because they just assume you know what they're talking about. They say words and concepts and phrases, and they just make the assumption that you know what they're saying when really you have absolutely no idea, but then you're too shy to say anything because you don't want to look dumb compared to all your other peers. So that's what I want to avoid today. I do try to break things down a little bit more slowly so that it should be a little bit simpler to understand. Other things is I don't want you to fall asleep. I can say that I've been guilty of falling asleep in class because I was either very tired or very bored. So that's what I try to avoid is I don't want you to, get too bored. I don't want to bore you to death. So we do try to do some interactive components, some polls, just so you can actually feel like you're, being engaged in the presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to activate the first poll. So there's a QR code. You don't have to register or anything. You just scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and then they'll ask you for a code number. So 1275500. So I just tested it out very quickly. So if you can just write in what your major is. I just want to know who's here today, just to see who's interested so far. So I think the poll is live. So I'll just give you a few moments just to put in your major. Okay, so I see software engineering and I also see neuroscience. Okay, I'm sure there's other ones that would also be interested. Maybe they're just not here today. Okay, so I'll just close the poll for now and we'll move on to the next part. Second poll, I'll open that one up too. So how much do you actually know about Mitacs? It could be a lot, it could be a little, it could just be I heard of the name, and it could be what the heck is Mitacs? Okay, so I have a little bit of a split. Some people know, some people don't. Okay, that's expected. All right, so I'll close that poll too. So the hope is that by the end of this, you will learn a little bit about Mitacs, and hopefully you can at least answer a little bit as your response. Okay, so what is Mitacs? A lot of times when I tell people I work at Mitacs, I either get the phrase of, what is that? Is that like some new startup in Calgary? And then sometimes they mishear and they think I do taxes and that I'm an accountant. So that's not that either. So Mitacs, we're a national nonprofit in Canada. So our mandate is to promote research and innovation in Canada and also train the next generation of researchers. So what we do is that we basically bring together organizations and companies to work with really smart and talented people from post-secondary institutions like universities and colleges, so that we all work together to solve technical challenges and also societal challenges. So where does our money come from? A lot of times when we say things like, I work in a nonprofit, a lot of times people think, there's no money. So in this case, we do have funding from our funding partners. So that's from the federal government as well as the provincial governments. So we have a national team. We're a national organization, so there's Mitacs representatives all across the country. At U of C, there's just 3 of us, so it's myself, Angela, and Sarah. So I do mostly, I work with researchers in the Faculty of Science, Schulich School of Engineering. My colleague, Sarah Topp, she works with more medicine, arts, social sciences, and related areas. And then our colleague Angelo, he does a bit of everything. He works with all disciplines. He actually works with other schools in Southern Alberta, so not just U of C, also SAIT, Mount Royal, Bow Valley, and other colleges in the southern region. So we all work together on projects. So sometimes I do help out with working with other faculties as well, but I primarily do science and engineering. So normally I would also do another poll, but I already have data from a year ago, from a while ago. So I did ask this on Reddit, and I asked, what's the best way to get experience for your degree? Does anyone have a guess of what that is? Research? Any other guesses? Yeah. Internships? Yeah. So those were the top 2 answers. So most people said either some kind of internship or co-op program. Some people said summer research. Other responses were, having a part-time job. Some people responded, having volunteer work or extracurriculars. And then some people also said none of the above. I'm just here to get my fancy piece of paper, referring to their degree. So one of the things that you will see eventually when you do graduate is that it's not enough to just have a degree. You do need to have other experience, and that makes it more likely that you would get hired for a job when you graduate. So also want to tell you kind of, now that we're talking about internships and Mitacs, in terms of ranking among all the universities in Canada, U of C is actually ranked number 2 in the country for the number of Mitacs internships that are done here and being submitted. We're also ranked number 1 in Alberta. There was also a U Today article that happened that was here last month. So if you're interested in reading more about this story and reading more about how students, what the experience was for students to do a Mitacs internship, you can read it in the U Today article. So why should people do a Mitacs internship? I know there's lots of other internship programs. Mitacs is just one of them, but a lot of times people do it because they really want to gain industry experience. They want to expand their industry network. A lot of people, they try to incorporate it in other things that they're doing. It could be part of your summer research project. Some people use it as part of their internship or their co-op requirements. I know some people like to use it as part of their graduate thesis, so they'll incorporate the results from their internship and put it into their master's or their PhD thesis. You get to use your knowledge and skills that you learned in school, because you always wonder, well, when am I ever going to need this? And you can use it to solve real world problems that companies and organizations are facing. And probably the most important is you actually do get paid. So these are paid internships. I always thought that was a given. I thought that was pretty obvious, but then my colleague Sarah, who works with social sciences and humanities, she told me that it's actually more common in that area to not get paid, and then they do a lot of unpaid internships. So we have to actually clarify that these are paid internship projects. So there's different programs on our website, and because there's so many different programs, different eligibility criteria, people always get really confused of, well, which one can I actually apply for? So as undergrads, the main 2 programs for research would be what we call the Accelerate program. So that's if you're trying to get research experience with a professor and an industry partner, so like a company. And then our other one is what I call Research Abroad. So this is called our Global Link Research Award program. So this is if you want to go to a different country and work in a research group abroad. So if you like traveling, that might be a better fit. So I'll start with Accelerate, just because with industry collaborations, that one is a lot more, a little bit more trickier and a little bit harder to understand. So it takes a little bit longer to go through. So if you ever come to our other talks, my colleagues and I, we always talk about something called the Mitacs triangle, and it's going to make more sense on the next slide, but I'm going to start showing you how we build it together. So for my brother, when he was in school, he did an internship. He worked for a company for about a year, and then he had an internship. That was his internship component because he was in the engineering program. So that's pretty common. A lot of people do internships. They understand, I'm going to go work for a company for X amount of time. The other one other ways people get experience, like someone mentioned, is to do research. So this is what I did. I did summer research. I did the equivalent of an honors thesis project in my final year of my undergrad. I also did my master's thesis, and I worked for a professor in their research group. Now, what is probably not as obvious is that a lot of professors actually do work with industry. They do work with companies, they do work with community partners, and they work on research projects together. And they do have students and postdocs work on those projects. And so that one is typically not as obvious. So the question is, well, what if we actually try to combine all of these three things together? And when we do that, that's what we have. That is Mitacs Accelerate. It's kind of this interesting hybrid model where if you're a student, you actually get experience with working with both an industry partner, so like a company, and also getting experience with working with a professor in their research group. So this is what we refer to as the Mitacs triangle. So you have an industry partner on one side, on the industry side, and then you have the academic side. So that's a professor, so that's your academic supervisor, and then the intern. So the intern is a post-secondary student, so it could be anywhere from undergrad to grad school to even to postdoc. Sometimes industry partners in other areas like social sciences, they don't like to use the word industry. They like to use words like community partner or words like partner organization. They essentially mean the same thing. Shortest project is 4 months, but you can do longer term projects. I know a lot of people do more than one project. Some people like to do longer term internships, like a year or 16 months. So we can do longer term projects as well. In terms of eligibility, so we've actually broadened it. Previously, we weren't actually open to undergrads, which is probably why most people had never heard of us at the undergraduate level. We opened it up late last year, and then now we're just trying to do more outreach so that more undergrad students know that this is available. It's also open to college students in Canada, also open to grad students. So if you're going to grad studies and you're going to do a master's or PhD, you can apply then. And it's even open to postdocs. So postdocs are people who recently had their PhD and they're doing more advanced training at a university. So these are open if you're enrolled in a Canadian post-secondary institution, like a university or college in Canada. So we are open to both domestic and international students. So if you're a Canadian student or if you're an international student, you are eligible for a program. And then we're also open to every discipline. So I know a lot of people think we only do STEM projects and we only fund STEM areas, but we do fund all disciplines. My colleague Sarah, she works a lot with the Faculty of Social Work, and they actually have the biggest project at U of C. It's actually bigger than any of the engineering projects, if you can believe that. So there are projects in arts and social sciences, and if you're doing something multidisciplinary, we're open to that too. So I put this also as no upper age limit. This is usually a common question for grad students or postdocs, but even some undergrads, if you're, let's say, a mature student, or maybe you're doing another degree, or maybe you took time off, or you went to work and you want to come back to school, there's no upper age limit. So it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 30 or 50, we don't have that limit. In terms of academic supervisors, so I'll read off what it says on our website, which is a bit confusing. It says faculty members at all Canadian universities who are eligible to hold tri-agency funds and faculty or designated staff at Canadian colleges. So that sounds very confusing. What does that mean? I also say it is open to all disciplines and all faculties. Technically, they don't even have to be in the same faculty as you, but they do have to be at the same school as you. So essentially what this eligibility means is that it has to be either a professor or an instructor who can hold basically research grants. So tri-agency, a lot of professors call it the tri-council. So you might be familiar with NSERC, CIHR, SSHRC. So that's for natural sciences and engineering, health sciences and social sciences and humanities research. So those are kind of the more well-known funding agencies. So if a professor has grants in one of those funding agencies, then they can be an academic supervisor and they can hold a Mitacs grant. So at U of C, professors I know can hold it. Instructor is a bit weird. So some instructors, their job is just teaching and they don't hold grants, while other instructors, they teach, but they also hold research grants and they do some research. So it's a little confusing in that case, but most faculty members at U of C are eligible. In terms of industry partners, a lot of times we get questions of what is an industry partner. Most times we think of businesses or companies. So these are for-profit companies. A lot of times we think of the large companies in our area, in our field of study, because when we say, hey, I study computer science, here are the top 3 companies I'd love to work for, that's usually what we're thinking of. Actually, at Mitacs, we actually work with a lot of smaller companies. We do work with a lot of what's called SMEs, so that's small, medium enterprises. We even work with a lot of startups. A lot of companies we work with actually have less than 50 people, so they're actually quite small, but they are looking for really strong, talented people to help them and help them grow. We also work with a lot of nonprofits in Canada. So if you are working with a nonprofit, just let us know so we can just check their eligibility. Most of them are eligible, but there's always a few that might not be. I know this is really common for social sciences and humanities and arts. They tend to work with nonprofits a lot, but there are some people in STEM that work with nonprofits as well. We've also expanded eligibility to municipalities, so you can work with the City of Calgary. I know they've done a few projects with us. And we've also expanded it to hospitals in Canada. So if you are working with hospital, just make sure to also include Sarah on your email, because Sarah is our national lead for hospital projects. So she's the one who can check that your particular project and your particular hospital is eligible for our funding. Okay, so I'll go over the Mitacs Accelerator program, and I'm going to break it down to different steps. So all of our projects are made up of building blocks. These are called units. So each one of these building blocks has that Mitacs triangle. So 1 student, 1 professor, 1 industry partner. And then each one of them is 4 to 6 months in length. Most of them are usually 4 months, but if you wanted to do it, maybe your project part-time, you can extend it to 6 months instead. So like I said, remember how Mitacs internships are not traditional internships, or they're more like a hybrid model, because you're working with both the professor and the industry partner. So what happens is that you'll actually spend time at both sides to work on one project. So sometimes, some days you'll work with the industry partner doing the project, some days you'll work at the university doing the same project, typically 50-50 split. Sometimes you'll need to spend more time at one side. So maybe you're working for a little startup company and they said, we need to do analysis on nanoparticles and we need a transmission electron microscope, but they don't have one. But the university has one. So you might need to spend more time at the university and a little bit less time with the company. So in that case, the minimum is always 25%. And it is a requirement. So spirit of our program is that at the end of the project, you will have some industry experience. I know sometimes professors, they think, well, why can't you just do everything at the university? Why do you have to go to the company? Because that's why we still call it an internship, is because you are getting that industry experience. So in terms of the funding, this is kind of just meant to be a very easy way of remembering it. 50% of the funding is covered by the industry partner and 50% is covered by Mitacs. So from a professor's standpoint, they don't need to use any of their grants to pay you. They just use the Mitacs grant, which is co-funded by industry and Mitacs. So each one of those blocks that I showed either has $10,000 on it or $15,000, and I'll show you in a minute what that means. And then there's a note at the bottom says you can have more than one of these blocks. So just to recap, so remember, one of these blocks, 1 student, 1 professor, 1 industry partner, typically 4 months. So if you're having the $10,000 model, again, 50% from the partner, so that'd be $5,000 from them. 10,000, all 10,000 actually goes to the student, and that's paid to you as stipend. So there's no other money to pay to purchase any other expenses. So this, I can see some undergrads using this one if you don't need to buy anything. Now, if you do need to buy stuff, typically we call it the $15,000 model. This is the more standard model. This is more common. I see this more commonly used, typically because we need to buy stuff. So again, 10,000 still goes to the student. The other 5,000 is more flexible. We call that flex funds. So you can use it to purchase things like materials or chemicals or equipment or instrument fees, or if you need to go to a conference, or if you're using it for publication costs, or maybe you want to buy a software license to do certain computer modeling. So that's what the 5,000 is for. Now, sometimes, you don't need all 5,000 and you're thinking, well, what do I do if I only need $3,000 for expenses? So what you can do is you can actually top up the stipend and you can actually get paid more. So let's pretend you get paid $12,000 for 4 months, and then you have $3,000 for other expenses. I have seen some cases where they just give all $15,000 to the student, and I have seen that, especially for more advanced projects, or sometimes the company's like, yeah, let's just give it all to the student. We have all the equipment we need. We'll just give it to the student. So there are some students who get all $15,000 for 4 months. Okay, in terms of, one of our other workshops is how to talk to a professor about this. From a professor standpoint, they're usually not as interested when it's 10,000 or 15,000, just because, it's a lot of paperwork. And from their perspective, that's not a lot of money. It is a lot for a student, but for a professor, when they're applying for a lot of grants, they like to apply for things with a lot of money. So what you can do is that you can actually stack all of these blocks together, because students can have more than one. And then depending on what level a student or what level of degree you're currently studying, that just dictates how many you get. But you can have multiple students on the same project application. You can have them at the same time. You can have one start first and another come later. So you can make them a lot bigger. And I think the biggest at U of C is actually 173 of these blocks on one application. So I won't go over all of the degree levels just because this is for undergrads, but for undergraduate students, you get 3 of them. You can do them in different semesters, different years, or you can do them back to back. So you could actually stack them together and do 3 blocks and make them a 1-year project. Or if you really wanted to extend everything, you can make them 6 months each, and then 6 times 3 is 18 months. So the longest project that an undergrad can do is 18 months. Now, if you wanted to go to grad school or do a postdoc one day, every time you move up a level, you get more and more of these blocks. So theoretically, you could do a Mitacs project every degree that you actually do. So in terms of the process, make sure before you actually get started, you have all the pieces. So you have an industry partner, and you also have a professor to be the academic supervisor. You'll notice how I have TBD here. So TBD is usually in cases where the prof says, you know what, I actually need more than one student, but I don't know who the other person is. I need to recruit somebody, but I don't want to delay the application any further, but I want to submit it now. I'll just recruit them later. So the only time you can have TBD is for the intern. You cannot have TBD for the prof or the industry partner. That one has to be identified before you apply. Now, application package is online. Our website is a bit confusing. It's a bit hard to navigate. But usually when you have all the pieces, what you do is send me an email, and then we'll set up a meeting. We'll go over the application process together. And then when you have a first draft, you can send it to me again, and then I can actually review it and give you some feedback before it goes to the official review process. I've seen a lot of applications, so I tend to know what reviewers tend to say. So if I'm telling you, hey, you need to write a little bit more in this section, or I don't feel like you quite answered this question properly, I would recommend that you follow my advice. So review process, typically it's an 8-week review process. So if you are looking to start in May 2023, so next summer, I do advise that you want to apply even earlier than 8 weeks, just because it's going to be a huge surge in applications in February to March. So if you can, I would advise probably January, early February would be a good time to apply. If you happen to be on one of the large projects, like if you were on that 173 unit project, those ones do take longer to review just because reviewers need more time. But most projects that are usually small that undergrads are on typically will be about 8 weeks. Now, reviewers, they'll give you their comments, and then you'll either get approved or have a revision request, or you'll get very rarely, you might get declined. So for most people, they usually get approved on the first try. Sometimes reviewers will have questions, or they'll ask for more clarity. So they'll ask you to revise your application, kind of like if you've ever submitted a paper to a journal. You'll have reviewers, they'll have questions, and then you can revise your paper. In this case, you're just revising your proposal. And then the more rare cases, you might get declined. So if for some reason you're not eligible, or if it can't pass peer review, that's when you might get a decline. But most of them are approved within the first or second try. So once you do get approved, you can either start right away, or you can start within the next 12 months. Usually it's because the professor has people they need to recruit to the project, so they don't start right away. They still need to find people. So those are the cases where they might not start right away when they get approved. Okay, I did want to kind of clarify the flow of funds, just because, I always get questions from students of, well, how do I get paid? And who do I actually work for? If I'm working with the prof and also the company, but Mitacs is also kind of paying it. So then who do I get my paycheck from? Like, who do I actually work for? So that part is a bit confusing. So this diagram kind of just shows how the flow of funds work. So what happens, remember, is 50% from industry, 50% from Mitacs. So industry will send their half. So let's pretend they're sending us 7,500. Mitacs will take another 7,500 and put it together, and then we'll put $15,000 together, and that becomes the Mitacs grant. Then Mitacs will take that grant, send it to the university and say, hi, university, here's $15,000. It's meant for student X. And they'll say, cool, we're going to put this in a research account. And they say, okay, here's the research account. And the professor who's on the application will hold that account, and they'll be in charge of making sure that the money gets used properly to pay you and to pay for expenses. And so the benefit of doing it this way, even though it sounds a bit convoluted, is because for students, your stipend is paid out like a scholarship or an award. So what does that mean? It means that it's not going to be taxable. So let's pretend you get the base $10,000 minimum stipend. It's $10,000 and not less. In cases where it is less than that would be for postdocs. So postdocs are the ones that are taxed on their salary just because they are employees of the university, but students are always paid out as scholarship instead at U of C. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit better. One of the things I just want to clarify is that as a Mitacs intern, this is a little bit confusing, is you're not actually an employee of the industry partner. So you're not hired directly by them. You're not on their payroll. You're officially under the university as a student, and you're considered to be a research collaborator to the company. So from the company's perspective of why they like this process is that for them, they don't have to do all the payroll paperwork. They don't even have to do T4s because the university will do it for them. So from their perspective, they just see it as, oh, I just have to pay my half, and all the admin work, I just let Mitacs and the university handle the rest. So a lot of small companies, especially startups, really like that. Okay, so in terms of advantages of Mitacs Accelerate, I know there's lots of other funding programs at the university and at the undergrad level. So I just want to show you a couple of advantages of why people like to apply for Mitacs Accelerate. So one is the high success rate. So it's actually a 95% success rate. And no, I did not say that wrong. It is 95% success across the country. So it's high because you have people like myself and other advisors. We ask that you meet with us first just to make sure you're eligible. So we do filter out things that are not eligible in the first place. We also look at your application, like I said, during the application process, and then we can get feedback so that we try to make it as good as it can be before it goes to peer review. And also because you go through this peer review process, we do allow you to revise your application if it's needed. If the reviewers say, hey, I just need some clarification, you can revise your application and then make it better. It's also a non-competitive process, which I know sounds a little weird because when you're used to applying for awards and scholarships and funding, you're used to having to compete against everyone else. And maybe everybody has a really good application, but they only have a limited number of awards that they can hand out. Mitacs is a bit different. Mitacs for this one, for Mitacs Accelerate, basically, as long as your project is eligible and that you write an application and a proposal that passes peer review, then you can get funded. So if everyone here was eligible, found an industry partner, found a company, found a professor, all wrote a really good application, passed peer review, then everyone here could actually get funded under this program. We also don't look at things like GPA. We don't need any reference letters. So it doesn't matter if you're a 3.0 student or 3.5 or 4.0, you're not at any disadvantage from the Mitacs side of things in terms of assessment because we don't look at those things. Now, I will say some professors do prefer students with higher GPAs. Some companies prefer that as well. So that's more of their internal criteria. But from the Mitacs side, we don't assess GPA and we don't need reference letters. We're also open all year round. So sometimes when people think like, oh, shoot, I missed the deadline, right? That's a very common thing. We're open any time of the year. But just keep in mind that because of the review process taking at least 8 weeks, you just want to make sure you give yourself enough time to get your application approved so that you can start when your project needs to start. So if you're starting in May, just make sure you submit it early enough so that the application is approved in time. And like I mentioned, we're here to help, right? So if you have questions about the application process, just shoot me an email and then I'll help you through the process. And like I said before, you do get feedback. So you get feedback from other professors and other universities who will read your proposal and your application, and they can tell you, hey, this part is really cool. I like that you're doing this kind of project. And if something doesn't make sense, they will tell you that too. And then, like I said, you can revise it if it's needed. Most of them usually don't need a revision, but sometimes you do. So I did want to just show a quote from a past Mitacs intern. So this was part of that New Today article that came out last month. And at the end of the article, it said, during my Mitacs internship, I was able to apply what I learned throughout my academic career to work on real world projects that have impact. The experience helped immensely with the transition between academia and industry, and it gave me the opportunity to build confidence in my skills. So this was actually a grad student. So they were in I think they were in the Masters of Biotechnology program, and they had an internship component to their academic program. So they did a Mitacs internship, and they were so good that the company ended up hiring them full time, and now they're a product marketing manager at Deep Surface AI. Now, not all interns are going to be rehired by the same company, but at least even if you don't get rehired, at least you have experience so that when you are applying for other jobs, it does help you. And it does help you have an edge and helps you stand out. And so that does make it more likely that you'll be hired, hopefully a little bit quicker than if you didn't have any kind of experience. Okay, so I'll go over one more program. So that was the industry side. That's the more complicated. I want to work with industry. I want to get industry experience. I'm going to work with a professor's lab. Global Link Research Award, that's on the other side of the spectrum. That's if you're looking to go do research abroad, and there's no company involved. So I know some professors really love this program because they don't need to find a company and they have collaborators in other countries. So I'll just kind of go over in a nutshell. We will have a whole workshop, I think, later this semester just to go over the Global Link Research Award. So this one is a purely kind of academic collaboration, but it's with collaborations with other countries. So you at U of C would be traveling to another country that's on the list of eligible countries to work with a different professor in their research group. So let's say you wanted to go to work with a university in France and you're going to travel there for a few months. So it's a $6,000 travel award. It's meant to help cover things like, your plane tickets, some of your living expenses, some of your food costs. It probably won't cover the whole trip just because if you are there for a long time, you probably need more than $6,000. I know U of C has a lot of different travel funding and study abroad, and there's probably other funding in your department or faculty that you might have access to. If you can, I would recommend looking into that just to see if there's no rules against having both awards, you might be able to have more than one. I know one of my friends did that where they found an extra $3,000 somewhere. So they had $9,000, but the first $6,000 came from the Mitacs Global Link Research Award program. It is open to senior undergrads, grad students, and postdocs. In the context of what senior undergrad means, it just means that at U of C that you finished at least 2 years of your program. And then for projects, they're 3 to 6 months abroad. You can do some of it at U of C. So if you're not able to travel for the full project, 75% does have to be abroad, but you can do 25% here. So if you wanted to do a 12-week project, you could spend 9 weeks abroad and then 3 weeks at U of C. And then for this project, you do have to have 2 supervisors. So one is a home supervisor at U of C, and the other one is a host supervisor. So that will be the professor in the university abroad. So again, we're open to all disciplines, and then it's open all year round. So I did want to note that a lot of times people find this program through the Mitacs website. I do want to direct you to a different website. So please make sure you're going to the U of C International Office website and find Mitacs Outgoing. So this is outgoing as in you're going outside of Canada. So you're traveling abroad. So this one, it has very specific guidelines because every university handles, traveling abroad a little differently. So this one has very specific rules for U of C. So if you're a U of C student, please make sure you're following this set of guidelines. This one has very clear instructions, and then I usually just direct everyone here, and then make sure you read it very carefully and follow all the steps very carefully. So we're almost at the end of today's workshop. We do have other sessions coming up. So I know a really popular topic, at least with grad students, is finding an industry partner, usually because people are interested in applying, but they realize they don't have an industry partner. Even if you're not applying for Mitacs, it's still useful to know how industry thinks. It's still useful to know how do I talk to industry, especially if you're looking for a job after you graduate and you want to work for a company. You have to understand that people in industry think a lot differently than people in academics. We'll also have a talk, some workshops in the URS, so Undergrad Research Symposium. So that's in mid-November. We'll talk about how to approach professors, how do you find them, how do you talk about Mitacs with them. Some professors already know about Mitacs Accelerate. Some of them, heard of the name, maybe don't know how it works. So how do you talk about it and more clearly? Other things are, we will talk about how to write grants. So let's say you found all the pieces, but this is the first time you've ever written a research proposal, first time you've ever written a research grant. How do you write it? What are the tips and tricks? So I'll go over that with you. And then the last one will be doing research abroad. So we'll go over the Mitacs Global Link Research Award in more detail. So here's the link, the registration link, just to sign up for the workshops, just so we know that you're coming. So there's other Mitacs training. So these training sessions, those ones are not facilitated by me. Those are either self-directed online training courses, or sometimes they are facilitated either online or in person. There's also different topics and so they are free for students. So if you're interested in any of these topics, feel free to register for them. Especially something like project management, that's actually a very expensive type of training session when you're not a student. Usually, people pay a lot of money just to get project management training. So any of these, if you're interested, feel free to sign up for them as well. Okay, so we're near the end. If you're ever wondering, if you have questions, how do you contact a Mitacs representative? So one of the things is, please don't do this. Sometimes students write emails like this where they don't give me a very clear subject line. They write like one line and it doesn't tell me anything about them. And all they say is, I just want to apply. How do I do it? So we're going to try to see how do we improve this type of email. So when you're writing emails to, let's say, a funding organization like Mitacs, and you're trying to contact a representative or an advisor like myself, make sure you have a subject line that's actually, somewhat detailed and actually tells me something that's useful, like which program you're wanting to apply for. Say things like your name, tell me what year you're in, what program you're in. Some of my colleagues work with other universities, so even just telling me what university you're in helps if you also tell me when you're going to graduate or when you expect to graduate, just because then I know how much time you're still eligible for these programs. Sometimes it helps if I know how you found out about our programs. And then here in this example, I wrote, if you've in this case, they've talked to a professor, they are collaborating with a company. I do recognize not everyone has a professor or company yet, and they're still early in that stage. But even if you just tell me who you've started contacting with, who you'd like to collaborate with, just so I know that you're actually starting the process, that's really helpful. If you do have questions, you can write them in the email. Sometimes people have lots of questions and it's actually harder to answer them through email. Sometimes it's easier if we just have a phone call. Sometimes we'll just do like a Teams call or a Zoom call, and very rarely sometimes we can do it in person, but that's depending if I'm on campus that day. And then just make sure to sign off with your name properly. Now, there are some cases where you do have more than one Mitacs rep you need to contact, because maybe you want to work with a hospital, maybe your project is more multidisciplinary. In those cases, if you do need to contact more than one of us, please just write one email chain. I've seen some students where they try to write the same email 3 times to all 3 of us, and there's 3 different email chains. Sometimes I have emails saying, hi, Angelo, or hi, Sarah. And then I realized Sarah's not even on the email chain, it's just me, because I realized they just sent the same email 3 times. So just for you guys to make it simpler, just write one email. That should be enough. One of us will get back to you. We do try to get back to you within a few business days, but sometimes it does take a little bit longer if we're away for conferences or if we just have a lot of meetings that week. Okay, so I'll do one more QR code. Basically, I just want to know, what did you learn today? So again, you can scan the QR code or go to slido.com and then just let me activate the code. Okay, so it is activated. So if you can just write what you've learned today, that would be, I just want to see, you can write one word, you can write a phrase, write a sentence, you can write more than one response. So I'll give you a few moments to write that. Okay, so I see some people, they said that Mitacs is a way to gain real experience and make money. Some people said they learned about Mitacs Accelerate and the Global Link Award and how all the different pieces fit together for a Mitacs project. So I'm glad to hear that we've learned a little bit today, a little bit more about Mitacs today. So there are more sessions coming up, so feel free to register for them. I'll be facilitating the other sessions as well. Like I said, here's my email. That's the best way to contact me. I know I have my work phone number on here. I usually can't just pick up whenever. I know sometimes students randomly try to call me. I'm usually in another presentation or another meeting, so I usually can't pick up right away, so you'll have to leave a message. But I'll be honest, the best way to contact me is just through email. And like I said, if you do need to email more than one of us on the email chain, just put all three of us on there. Most cases, you can just email me, and if I feel like either Sarah and Angelo have to be on it, I'll just CC them in my response. So thank you so much today for coming. Thanks for watching this video. I will kind of just make a note is that Mitacs' programs are always evolving. So sometimes there's changes to our programs, sometimes there's new programs, sometimes there's changes to funding options or eligibility. So just make sure you're always kind of keeping up to date with the newest updates at Mitacs. So sometimes there are going to be changes to versus whatever I presented today. So I just want to say thank you again to Student Union and Student Union reps just for helping to set up this presentation and for the workshop series. So hope to see you next time. Bye, everyone.